Hi, everybody. We will call this City Council work session to order. For the record, it is Tuesday, February 13th, 2024 at 4:30 p.m. We will begin this meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Councilwoman Cavanagh.
Here.
Apologies, Councilman Cavanagh. Councilwoman Little Roberts. Here. Councilman Taylor. Here. Councilman Overton.
Here.
Councilwoman Strader.
Here. Thank you. The next item is the adoption of the agenda.
Madam Vice President,
Yes, Councilman Cavanagh.
I've had the chance to review the consent agenda and see no changes, so I move that we approve the consent agenda as published.
Councilman Cavanagh, do you move to adopt the agenda?
Sorry, adopt the agenda as presented. Thank you.
Fantastic. Excellent. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the agenda is adopted. On to the consent agenda.
Madam Vice President.
Councilman Cavanagh.
And now, if it so pleases everyone, I would move that we approve the consent agenda as presented for the Vice President to sign, the clerk to attest.
Second.
Excellent. Is there any discussion? All in favor of approving the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the consent agenda is approved. With that, next up, we have our department commission reports. We'll begin with item 6, the Urban Renewal District discussion with the legal counsel for MDC and our Union Urban Renewal District, Mr. Todd Lakey. Mr. Lakey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, council members. Appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I was kind of asked, as for the record, Todd Lakey, legal counsel for the Urban Renewal Agency, MDC. I was asked to kind of go through Urban Renewal 101, so to speak. And I'll just kind of cover some of the high points. And as we go along, please feel free to ask questions or whatever. I don't have to be a talking head the whole time. I can do that. Lawyers do that, but don't feel like I have to. I would prefer not to. So, Chris, thanks for getting the slides up. Do I hit up or down, or do you take?
Recommend the right arrow, left arrow.
Right arrow. Okay. Okay, great. Okay, so urban renewal law is contained in 2 places in Title 50, same chapter as, or same title as city law, but it's chapters 20 and 29. One deals a little bit more with financing and one deals a little more with functionality. So I'll just kind of start with the basics. In Title 50, urban renewal traditionally has been about infrastructure and upgrading infrastructure, replacing infrastructure. So sewer, water extensions, roads, sidewalks, all of that. And then traditionally, it's also been a tool for removal of blight and decay. So rundown buildings, rundown properties, again, defective infrastructure, and all of that to help promote development or redevelopment of property within the city. And that's kind of the historic use of it, the historic perspective, and it's also been updated over time. So the Urban Renewal Agency has some provisions that also help promote development, economic development, and encourage private enterprise. That's one of the goals of this. So if you kind of think of it, the old downtown, that's the original urban renewal district for the city of Meridian. And it's a little bit more of the older school type, more broad, and 10 Mile is kind of the newer type, and I'll talk about the differences. But 10 Mile certainly was more of an urban renewal, economic development type project that was focused on by the city. And that's caused a little bit of contention and confusion. Some people say, well, it says blight removal, it says decay, that means not, or that doesn't mean economic development, that means sewer, water, those kind of things, and less about 10 Mile and more about downtown. But it does have both, and that generates some discussion and review. There is some legislation that seems like it's always percolating in the Capitol regarding that, and that's part of that discussion. But as currently written, it does let you do both. And economic development, I would say, is kind of a secondary purpose in the code as it's listed, but it is appropriate. And some of the things you look at from an economic development context are things like obsolete platting or diversity of ownership, such that you can't really coordinate things and have a unified project or development. Deterioration of structure and improvements, but economic underdevelopment, that's another criteria that you can consider. And when I say consider, I mean you as the city council, because you're the ones that form new districts and generate that and then turn that over to the agency once it's established. An area that is that substantially arrests sound growth and development of the municipality. So those are some of the criteria that you can use in an economic development context as a city. The code does call out encouraging private enterprise to the maximum extent. So that's really what urban renewal is supposed to be about, generating redevelopment that helps increase the tax base. So at the end of the day, when the urban renewal agency goes away, you have an enhanced tax base, and that increment goes back to the taxing districts, the cities and other taxing districts that are within the boundaries. I'll talk a little bit about it as we get further, but you have two concepts to remember. You have an urban renewal agency, which is the overall umbrella, and then underneath that you have urban renewal districts or tax increment districts that generate increment funding. Originally, the downtown district and the agency were kind of all the same thing, and it's easy to look at them as the same thing. But now you have multiple districts that you've formed under the umbrella of the agency, which can potentially cover the whole city if you decide to establish new districts. Oops, I went the wrong way. Okay. As I said, the city kind of drives it. Initially, you establish the agency, you establish new districts as we go along. The mayor nominates members to fill vacancies on the board, and then the council approves those. So it's with the advice and consent of council. Some of the specifics about the city council cannot have a majority on the urban renewal agency board. And they are supposed to be independent entities. And I'll talk a little bit more about the reasons legally for that later. But you can remove an urban renewal commissioner if they engage in inefficiency, neglect, or misconduct. But you can't just go say, all right, Dave Winder, thanks, kind of had enough, you bye. You have to have basically for cause to remove a commissioner. I've never seen that happen in 15 years, but it's possible. The council used to be able to replace the urban renewal board with itself, and I saw that actually Eagle did that for a while. The code was changed so you can't have a majority, but you can replace the entire board for a year if you want to, just for a big massive reset versus the appointed members that you have now. The council can also decide to make the board elected. I can't imagine anybody wanting to run for urban renewal commissioner, but I suppose it's possible. But I haven't really seen that implemented either. The vast majority of them are appointed. And there's a mixture of, usually, I think that's the most effective, a mixture of some from the city council and some from the community. So a little bit about the legal aspects of it. So the urban renewal agency is not supposed to be the alter ego of the city. And there's been lawsuits in regard to that. Eastern Idaho, the Yitkong case, the urban renewal agency was going to, I think it was approved bonds to build, I can't remember, it was a road or something. And the individual challenged that, saying, no, in Idaho, you have to have a vote to incur debt as a local government entity. But the court said, no, a city and a county, those are local government entities. An urban renewal agency is not that. It's not a city. Therefore, you can incur debt without a vote. But you have to make sure that they're separate. So if the urban renewal agency creeps more and more to becoming the alternate funding branch for the city, then that line starts to blur. And there's more of an opportunity for a legal challenge when the Urban Renewal Agency pursues funding on something, okay? So that's why I say down at the bottom there, cooperation with caution. Cities and the Urban Renewal Agency for that city always cooperate and talk and work together, but have to be very careful to make sure that they still are separate entities, and not just the Urban Renewal Agency is viewed just another way to build a public building or support city funding, okay? Let's see. Next one. So the powers and responsibilities, each urban renewal district has to have a plan. And that plan is ultimately adopted by both the agency and the city. And if you look at some of the foundational ordinances, you'll see that. Again, there's a difference here. The old plans, like the plan for the downtown area, is a little broader. It's more like, public infrastructure generally, parks, public art, transportation, infrastructure. It's kind of broad. If you look at the 10-mile plan or the Union District plan, we're going to build this much irrigation pipe, we're going to build this many roads, we're going to put in this many sidewalks, and it's very specific. And that was a result of some of the legislative changes that have been made that say an urban renewal agency is supposed to be specific. You get in, you do your thing, then you get out, close it down, and move on. Okay, so that's again the district, not the agency, but the district, the funding part of it. The agency also has more flexibility to acquire and dispose of real property than the city does. So when you want to get rid of something as a city, Bill tells you, all right, you got to declare you're going to sell it, you got to have a public auction. There's a lot more process to it than the Urban Renewal Agency has. We have to have a competitive process, but not all of the steps that you do. And an Urban Renewal Agency can also dispose of a piece of property at a loss. It doesn't have to be for fair market value. The idea being you are putting properties together to facilitate economic development, like the projects that you've seen in downtown. And to do that, you maybe help cover some of that gap in cost to do the project with the private entity that's going to do it by providing the property at something less than fair market value. But it does have to be fair value, and that's determined by the board and what you're requiring that property owner to do with it. So you typically don't see you just sell property as an urban renewal agency to do whatever. It's tied to some specific purpose. Any questions yet? Okay, all right. Powers again to improve and to redevelop property. The Urban Renewal Agency has the authority to invest, to borrow, to accept grants. Again, we can issue bonds. There was a recent change. The Urban Renewal Agency used to have eminent domain authority, but it no longer does. You have to be an elected board. So if you were to change the Urban Renewal Agency to elected positions, then they'd have that authority. I think that was just part of accountability for actually going in and paying somebody from for their property over their objection. Let's see. Okay. So these are, again, some of the examples of things that are called out in a plan. Demolition of buildings, environmental remediation, stagnant or undeveloped land, public art, public space, sidewalks, parking, all of those things are purposes that you'll see in a plan. Next slide. So we follow the same budget schedule that the city does, same fiscal year, similar process where we have to have a proposed budget that's published. You have a public hearing on the budget. The board ultimately adopts that budget. We're a little bit different in that as a city, you've got several silos, right, that you need to keep your money within those silos. The Urban Renewal Agency is one silo, essentially. So we have more flexibility between line items than the city may for different silos. But if we do set a budget amount and we get more money and then we budget it and we want to spend it, we have to amend the budget through the same process, just like you do. As you know, the budget is an estimate. You don't have to spend all of it. that. So part of what we focus on for expenditure of urban renewal funds, it has to have a primary public purpose. So infrastructure is real easy for an urban renewal agency to spend money on, right? Because it's sewer, it's water, it's sidewalks, it's roads, all of that is public infrastructure, public purpose. That's the focus. When we spend money, it needs to be for a public purpose. Some things that we analyze a little bit deeper and make sure that there's a public purpose are some of the facade improvement things that we've done downtown. In looking at that, the board needs to make sure the vast majority of that is for the public benefit, not for the benefit of the private property owner. So that's something that they do that's not your typical infrastructure type project. There's a couple of ways that we provide for reimbursement. So I call them this, they're not really described as that in code, but a development agreement is more of a straight reimbursement. So somebody comes to us and says, we need help with this sewer line. And we look at that and say, okay, we're gonna fund that. We have a development agreement. You finish the sewer line and it's X amount and we'll pay you on completion and approval and acceptance by the city. So it's a one-time reimbursement as soon as it's completed. The other way we fund things, and usually for the larger amounts, is over time. So that agency has a amount of money that's going to be generated from that site, tax increment, that can reimburse that developer over time. So they don't get it all at once, they get it over time from the increment benefit that they generate. As I said, we can do bank loans and bonds.
Mr. Leahy.
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. I'll chime in and I'll look around and see if other people have questions. I'm just curious. I thought, I recollect, maybe I'm wrong, that our urban renewal districts can't incur debt. Is that correct?
They can.
Oh, interesting. And so my understanding is that the ones that we're using now are using the increment and the direct reimbursement. Have we ever issued any debt?
So I don't believe that we have issued bonds in Meridian. We've looked at it a couple times. We did have a bank loan back when the Compass VRT building was built. Part of that cost, there was a loan, I think it was about $400,000 when I was first legal counsel way back then. So they can, but I would say it's not that common for urban renewal agencies around here to do it. The preference is definitely to say, we've got this amount of money set aside and we'll reimburse you, or we'll reimburse you over time. And the way we do an owner participation agreement is you'll get reimbursed from the money that comes in and the risk is on the developer. That's the way we do a lot of that long-term funding. We're happy to reimburse you from what you generate, but we're not going to guarantee that you're going to get paid all the way back. And it's in place for the life of the district. So that's the way we commonly do business, but they have the ability to do bonds.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Madam Vice President.
Councilman Taylor.
Mr. Leahy, you touched on it a little bit, but could you maybe go into a little bit more detail? You talked about what's reimbursable and you talked about the public good or public projects for the benefit of the area. Can you just go into a little more detail that how you distinguish a public benefit versus enhancements for a particular property and what's reimbursable?
So, Madam Vice President and Councilmember Taylor, the easiest to start is infrastructure. It's infrastructure in the right of way. That's really clearly public infrastructure, public benefit. You're upgrading the sewer for this project and somebody else. You're building roads and sidewalks that everybody's going to use. The other components of that, when you get on the site, demolition of an old building, that can still be, it's called out in the code, that can be a public benefit. If you've got a really crummy old building and you're knocking it down and replacing it, there's a public benefit to that. When you start to talk about like the exterior of the building, that's a little grayer, and you have more conversation about is there really a public benefit? For example, here, are we requiring them, instead of whatever they want to build and whatever exterior they want to put on, you need to put something that matches the historic downtown, and is more consistent. And there's a public benefit to that, and it's something that we require that they aren't necessarily required to do, if it's above and beyond whatever facade ordinance or requirements that the city may have. So it's kind of a weighing things, Councilmember Taylor. It's trying to focus on what you're agreeing to reimburse and really looking at, is there more of a public benefit or is this just for the private entity? So we wouldn't fund improvements to the interior of the building to make it nicer. That's really about those that are in the building and the benefit from it. Get outside the building, it's a little gray on the exterior part, but the closer you get to the right of way and within the public right of way, the more you're into the public benefit. Okay.
Mr. Leakey, if you want to
Yes.
continue, I do have one other question, just because it piqued my interest. What guardrails does the city council have around the ability for an urban renewal district to issue debt?
Madam Vice President, there really isn't. Once you establish it, then you designate that board. The board makes the decision on whether and how to issue bonds or how to pursue debt.
But at the time that the urban renewal district is created, typically wouldn't that funding mechanism be identified at that time?
So the funding mechanism is set out in state code as to how the urban renewal agencies can approach it. And they still have to operate within those confines.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thank you. Please continue.
So we talked about the increment financing and the district or revenue allocation area. Sometimes there's folks that will say, the urban renewal agency is a taxing entity and increases my taxes. The urban renewal agency doesn't have any control over the revenue it receives. They can't increase the levy or decrease the levy. It's all based on the taxing districts that are within the district. So what the city does, what the irrigation district does, what the highway district does, those things can affect the funds that the urban renewal agency receives. So just a real basic flow chart of how the urban renewal agency gets its money. And this is very basic just for terms of explanation. So you have your urban renewal agency boundaries. You have your taxpayers that are within the urban renewal district. They pay taxes into the county assessor. Say they started this district on January 1st, 2007. That was the base district when this was formed. So the taxable value, again for simplicity, of a piece of property is $100,000. And if the tax generated from that property is $1,000, then that's your base. All of that $1,000 goes out to the city, the local entities that generate that tax. 3 years later, if the property value is $150,000, then that $1,000 base stays with the city, and the $500 for that increased increment goes to the urban renewal agency. So that's the simple part of how to explain it. And all the taxing entities contribute to that formula, but that's the basic formula. So some of the requirements and sideboards. I said every urban renewal agency has to have a plan. And if you go outside of that plan, you're not supposed to go outside the plan. You're supposed to stay within it. The old downtown has a pretty broad descriptive plan, but the new ones don't. They're pretty specific. If you go outside of that plan or you amend that plan and want to change it, that can reset your base. So that in this case, the 2007 base would get bumped up to when you amend the plan with certain exceptions. So that nuclear picture there is kind of like you want to stay within your plan, otherwise you blow all your increment. So either you just stay with the plan. That's the rule. You don't want to amend it other than with the exceptions that you have. I'll talk some of those exceptions. The code provides for some exceptions. So if it's a technical or a ministerial change to your plan, it doesn't require a reset. You have the ability to do a one-time boundary adjustment, basically a 10% area increase. So you can bump out one side of it a little bit without causing a reset. De-annexation, the city's done that with like the Union District, for example. You take a piece out, that's not an amendment that requires a base reset. You can also amend it to support, and I haven't seen this argued, most people just stay in the plan, to support growth of an existing commercial or industrial project in an existing revenue allocation area. So that might be, say the Chobani or whoever locates here in Meridian, and you want to go outside of the infrastructure that you have planned for that particular project. If it's an existing one that's there, you can provide some more sewer lines to it. But again, most agencies just stay within your plan. There is also a requirement if some of the bad examples over time that the legislature has looked at are urban renewal agencies that build new government buildings that don't really contribute to the tax base. So a new police station or a new library or pick your public building. So there's been legislation over time to kind of address that where there's been some abuses. If it's a government building or the special, when that legislation was passed that year, a multi-purpose sports park facility. So AKA in 3 years ago when that was passed, we don't want the Boise Hawks getting urban renewal money to build their whatever, wherever they're going to build it. So it kind of got generically described as that. That was, anyway, an overly specific thing from my mind, but that was adopted. If it's a municipal building, so an administration building, a city hall, a library, a courthouse, a police, fire station, or a jail, if 51% or more of the total project cost is contributed from those public funds, then it requires a vote. So that's where urban renewal shouldn't be paying for public buildings without a vote, as in public debt, because you're providing alternate funding for an entity that does require a vote for funding. The public funds, though, don't include federal grants, private donations, and the project cost that you're evaluating doesn't include infrastructure. So if you're building roads and public sewer and water to that public building, that still benefits everybody and it doesn't get counted against you in the cost. Vice President Strader, I know I'm getting close to time. Another couple minutes. What?
I think that's fine.
Okay.
Mr. Lakey, you can continue for a bit. I want to make sure we leave enough time for the next item. Don't go far.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there's a new legislation that carves out the highway district levies. That was a year or two ago. Because they do infrastructure, you have to have an agreement between an urban renewal agency and the applicable highway district to use those funds on infrastructure within the district. And we've had a couple agreements with ACHD for some of the infrastructure work around the Union District, for example. We do have to submit information every year to a central registry regarding the plan and amendments and budgets similar to cities. Again, the agency's the umbrella. It requires a vote to establish a new agency, but not districts under the agency. So the city already has an agency. That doesn't have a lifespan. What has the lifespan are the specific districts that are under the agency. Sometimes people will say, well, the agency's going away in 25 years. Not really. The district that's formed may be going away in that period of time. Talked about that. So we are also subject to the same open meeting laws that you all have, the same public records laws, conflicts and ethics, similar. There is a union or an urban renewal specific statute where an urban renewal member can't voluntarily acquire a direct or indirect personal interest in an urban renewal project. And if they do that, that can be misconduct in office subject to that removal that we talked about earlier. And same procurement laws for public works construction and bidding and those kind of things that you have. Council Vice President, that's my presentation. I'm happy to answer other questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Lakey. Council, any further questions? Councilwoman Little Roberts.
Madam Vice President, Todd, thank you so much for your presentation. Just out of curiosity, we have done our one-time expansion, haven't we, of our downtown, or have we not ever used that?
Council Vice President and Councilmember Little Roberts, I think we've looked at it, but I don't think we've done it for the downtown. At one point, we were looking at the church over there behind the Masons building, but I don't think we ever did that expansion.
I think you're getting some help.
Oh, well, maybe Ashley will correct me.
We'll welcome
Hi, Ashley.
Administrator Squires. Go ahead, please.
We actually did use our one-time 10% expansion for the Union District. It was originally established in 2020 with just the Civic Block and the Union 93 block. In 2021, we expanded that to include half the block bounded by Idaho, 2nd, Main, and Broadway.
We de-annex after that?
No, we de-annexed before that.
Thank you.
Oh, good question. Thank you, Ashley, for correcting me.
Madam Vice President,
Councilman Cavanagh.
question maybe for Administrator Squares or you, Mr. Lakey. That 10% expansion then though still falls under the same clock, correct, as the original downtown?
Vice President and Councilmember Cavanagh, yes. So you get that one expansion, but it's of that existing district, so it doesn't restart the clock, still subject to the same.
Great, thank you. It looks like there are no further questions. Please stick around in case we need you for the next item. Thank you.
Thank you both.
These are informational updates and no action is required at this time. We will move on to item 7, the Union 93 update. It appears that Mr. Neri, the city attorney, is listed to kick off our discussion.
Thank you,
you.
Madam Vice President, members of the council. I guess I will start this discussion most with what is pending in court. There's some court actions. We get a number of questions weekly regarding the property across the street that we refer to as Union 93, and kind of what the state of that project is. So it currently is, there's 4 pending lawsuits that have now been consolidated into one case in front of the district court. It's currently assigned to Judge McDevitt, but in the scheduling order, the case is set for a 3-week trial currently to begin September 3rd, and it may get reassigned to a different judge. So there are a number of retired judges in the state that will hear cases of this type. And so depending on court schedules and other calendars of both Judge McDevitt as well as the other judges currently in the district, it may get assigned to a senior judge. So it's not clear yet. It hasn't been assigned as of this last order, which was a few weeks ago. But there are a number of cases. So the original case involves Oakland Construction, which was the construction manager and financer of the project, with Galena, who is the developer of the project, Galena Holdings, as the developer of the project. And the original lawsuits, there was actually 2 filed by Oakland against both Galena and East Broadway Investment, which is a subsidiary of Galena. They're the financing arm of that entity. So that those 2 lawsuits have been now consolidated into one. There's a subsequent one that's been filed by both CM Company, which was the construction management company on the project, and they have filed a case against Galena and East Broadway as well, along with Concrete Construction, which was the construction supplier for the project. So those are all pending. These are all damage claims types of project with the ownership of the liens on the property and the ownership of the property being part of the lawsuit. So the issue by the parties, the plaintiffs in this case, are either for the money damages they believe they're entitled to, or for the property then be sold, for then the proceeds to be paid for the money damages. The 4th lawsuit is a lawsuit in regards between the architectural firm for the project against the developer. So there's 4 total. The number, when I add up the number of damage claim for these 4 lawsuits, it's about $18 million. And so that's still pending. Again, no other action. Again, there's a lot of pleadings in this case. It may or may not happen in September. That's certainly dependent on the discovery, again, with the number of players here, because you have both the development entity, the construction builder of the project, the construction manager of the project, and there's a few of the lawsuits are involving subs of the project, electrical, plumbing, some of the others that will all have liens on it for various amounts of damage claims. This can be pretty complicated, and so it may or may not happen as soon as September. Could get stretched out. It really is kind of dependent on how long the discovery process takes, but that's the basics of what's happening currently. So if the question that's posed to any of the members of the council or the mayor or the mayor's office of, what's happening across the street, basically, the city's not a party of any of it. It really is an ongoing dispute between the developer of the project as well as the builders of the project. There's some damage claims that need to be settled. There's some, obviously, resolutions of the work that's been performed, needs to be resolved. We aren't a part of it, so we really just can monitor it as it is right now to see how that is progressing along. But we don't have any real control or any real party to that at this point.
Fantastic. Looking around at council, do you have any questions? I have a few, but I don't want to hog the microphone. Councilwoman Little Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The question I keep getting, is this going to be our equivalent of the Boise black hole?
I was gonna.
So, do we have any idea of what's happening in the future with this, since someone started the project and it's all obviously stalled?
Mr. Neri.
So, yeah, Madam Vice President, members of the council, Councilmember Little Roberts. Hopefully not. I had some involvement in that project as well. So hopefully it doesn't become that. I think Mr. Freckleton can probably answer some of those. I mean, really, on the lawsuit issue, I mean, we really don't have, we're not a party to this. Obviously, these are claims for damages. The city doesn't really have a role in the status of the project as long as they comply with our codes and maintaining the site, maintaining the safety, maintaining the security, maintaining the blightness of it. But it being sort of stalled in construction phase, it's kind of why in the past 20, 25 years in this area, you've seen a couple of these where they get stalled, and really the city's sort of stuck. I mean, we don't really have a mechanism to make that project move along any faster. And so that's kind of why the Boise Hole was like it was for many years. We had a few others like that. We are kind of in the same boat. We don't have tools to make that happen any quicker than what's happening now, other than because this lawsuit's pending. That's probably going to be the biggest delay.
Thank you.
Mr. Neri. Do we know which company is the mortgage holder, or at least has a current security interest in the property besides the sub liens?
Yeah, Madam Vice President, so the original lawsuit that was filed by Oakland Construction indicates both they are the construction company as well as the financier of the project. So they were both.
Interesting. Thank you. Are there any other questions for Mr. Neri?
Madam Vice President.
Councilman Taylor?
Bill, quick question. Do we know, you mentioned Oakland was part of as a financier of the project, but are there other entities who are financiers of this? Because I understand this is an opportunity zone, and sometimes how those were pulled together, there may be multiple parties. Do you have that information, what other parties might be also listed?
So, Madam Vice President, members of the council, Councilmember Taylor, in the lawsuits, they don't indicate another party that's a partnership of some sort with Oakland Construction. They list themselves as the lender in this project. So I don't show another party. I mean, the other party of the lawsuits, both Jackson, Maine is the architectural firm on the project, and then CM Company is one of the other plaintiffs in that, and they're both are either from the material work for the architect or construction management work that's been performed, and then there's subs, as I mentioned before, between electrical and plumbing and some of the others. But there's nobody else listed as a lender of the original. The amount of money that's claimed as damages by the other parties other than Oakland were based on work performed, not a loan. And Oakland's claim is a loan and work performed.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. I do have a question for Administrator Squires, if you have a moment, Ashley. Just a quick question regarding this. I'm not aware of, or at least could you update us as to any infrastructure improvements that have taken place within the Union District to date?
Madam Vice President, I am unaware of specifics. We don't typically see the laundry list of completion until they come in for their reimbursement, which doesn't happen until the end. We haven't reimbursed Union 93, the developer, in any way. First of all, we don't have any money within the district. I think we have about $4,000. But we don't see that until much later in the process.
Maybe just a quick follow-up question. If this situation were to continue, it would be very unfortunate. We're all hoping that doesn't occur, but I think the district lasts until like 2040. But if for some reason this were to kind of become what Councilwoman Roberts was referring to and sort of become our equivalent of like the black hole, what do we do? You know, at some point, do we change directions? Do we dissolve the district? I mean, what would be the types of things you would be considering at that time?
I think a lot will depend on what we do with the civic block and
Mhm.
how the other half block that's included in this district further redevelops as well, which I do know there are some plans and some visioning that is happening right now
Mhm.
regarding that half block. I think our future, hopefully soon, conversations regarding the civic block will help guide us in that. I also hope we can get through this legal process. I understand it's going to be painful. We're going to have to let it play out in the courts. I can't imagine anyone coming in and trying to make everybody whole and in taking over the project as it is. Don't think that's realistic to expect. So I think we need to just kind of bide our time and see how it moves forward. If for some reason we can't come to an agreement on the civic block, if we can't come to an agreement on the other half block as well, then that is something that we certainly should consider.
Thank you. Mr. Lakey.
So the urban renewal district is really all carrot, no stick, so to speak. We just have incentives for reimbursement. So we have the reimbursement agreements in place with those entities, but as Ashley said, we haven't made any reimbursement, but they do bind heirs, successors, and assigns. So somebody that steps in for them that does buy the project could pursue the reimbursement request as well. Usually there's some kind of general timelines built into those things. So at some point we could potentially get to the point where we're going to possibly terminate those agreements. But those agreements are an incentive for somebody to come in and buy the project and finish it. So we also want to be careful with that.
Thank you.
Madam Vice President.
Mr. Kavner.
Mr.
Councilman Kavner.
Squires, I know that's not the scenario that I think anybody would get excited about. Has the board had any conversations about when to reevaluate the existence of that district? Is it reassessed in a year, 2 years, 6 months? And if there hasn't been any conversations about it, that's certainly okay. Just trying to get a sense about certainly where the MDC is kind of landing on this.
Councilman Cavanagh, essentially, we've just been giving updates to the board. You know, there's been these ongoing promises from the developer that moving forward, we got cash infusion, so there's been a lot of hope on our side with the understanding that but the reality may not play out such as that. I think that is a conversation that we need to probably have this summer, and just kind of feel out the board as to what they're thinking. But as a longer conversation, no, we have not.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Fair enough. All right, if there are no other questions, we appreciate your time. We will move on now to our action items. Item number 8, fiscal year 2024 budget amendment in the amount of $339,000 for well 26 water treatment facility construction. And we will turn this over to Warren Stewart. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice President and members of the council. I have to make sure I get that right. Sorry about that.
It's a mouthful.
I'm here to seek your approval for a budget amendment for the last phase of the Well 26 treatment project. This project is being done to improve the water quality that comes from this source. This budget amendment will cover the cost of constructing the building and the equipment that goes in that building to house the filtration equipment that will clean up the water. The treatment tank was, the treatment vessel was purchased previously and is being stored at the Locust Grove Reservoir site until it can be incorporated into this project. The building construction phase of this project was actually bid out last year, but the bids came in significantly higher than we expected them to. And we opted to not award the bid and not come to you for a budget amendment at that time, but we actually went back to our consulting engineer and went through some value engineering efforts to try and find ways that we could potentially save some costs on this project. And then we just recently rebid the project. And gratefully, that worked. We were able to basically save about $1 million or $1.4 million on the bid. That comes through a combination of things. I would love to say that that was all, the value engineering efforts that we went forward with, but that's not reality. There was some cost savings there, and the things that we learned from that effort, we plan to incorporate in to future well treatment projects so that we can save that money in the future as well. But we also benefited by just the fact that we had a more favorable bid environment for this project. We had a lot more interest from more contractors, and we had a more competitive bid. And I'm sure that contributed significantly to our ability to get a better price. Even though that bid came in quite a bit less than the previous bid did, there's still a shortfall of $339,000 in order to complete this project and put it into service. And so I'm here tonight asking for your approval for a budget amendment for $339,000 so that we can award the contract and complete the well treatment facility for well 26. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Are there any questions?
Madam Vice President,
Councilman Taylor?
necessarily a question, but I do have some comments. Would that be appropriate now or after? I do intend to make the motion to approve it.
Please proceed.
Okay. So spent some time discussing this with our good director, Lorelei. I spoke with her a few times, including today. I think we're in a position where we have to kind of move forward where we are with this project to get it done. It makes some sense. I think it's the appropriate and wise thing to do. I did want to point out a couple of things, though. I think one thing and I wanted to make this comment generally for the council to consider not just new projects within Public Works, but elsewhere within the city. We've seen an incredible amount of federal funding for projects with the ARPA money and the CARES Act money and this federal stimulus and what that did. If you looked at Idaho, we're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in Idaho for wastewater, drinking water, and stormwater projects, enhancements, and things of that nature, and to the tune of hundreds of billions nationally. So we've created this an artificial demand in the market, which has led to an incredible demand on the materials, the engineering, the labor. And so what I think to some degree what we're looking at on this project is a result of some of that. Like the bids coming in $1 million over what we probably projected it to be. I'm really grateful. I think we did a good job on the value engineering, bringing that down. I do agree that I think we found a better environment. So the reason I mention that is I think it would be wise, and I spoke with our director about this, to look at it. There are some projects that we need to move forward with now, but there might be projects where maybe it makes some sense to wait. And so I would encourage all departments to look at our capital investment into projects and say, like, is this a good time to go out to bid? Because prices are really, really high. And I think that we need to be careful about how we do that. We're saving over $1 million from the bids we got to where we are now. So my recommendation is twofold for the city, is to look at, number one, do we need to do it now? And number two, the value engineering that went into the redo, maybe we need to be trying to look at how we could incorporate that in initially. And so I don't have all the answer. I just think that when looking at this issue, we do have a bit of a problem because there's so much investment into infrastructure that was designed intentionally to keep things moving, but the result of it is an artificial demand in these markets where A lot of people want to buy some pipe or they wanted some engineering, that you just can't help it. So there's a limit. And I think over time, we'll see the market kind of readjust back to more normal. And maybe to some degree, we saw that when we went out to bid the second time, maybe things were shuffling. So I think that as a city, we should be considering some of those aspects.
Thank you, Councilman Taylor. That's an interesting comment. Hopefully we're following our long-term financial planning. And so we're, doing things in a very methodical way and that we do have, I think, through our procurement department, also the flexibility that when we think the environment is not favorable, that when we can adjust the timing. But I think that's an excellent point. Are there any other comments or questions or motions?
Madam Vice Chair, for a motion,
Councilman Taylor.
propose that we approve the fiscal year 2024 budget amendment in the amount of $339,000 for well 26 water treatment facility construction.
Have a second?
Second?
All right, and there is a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving item 8, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the budget amendment is approved. On to item 9. Do we have a motion there?
Madam Vice President,
Councilman
motion?
Taylor.
I move that we approve the construction contract to Erminger, I hope I said that right, Construction Incorporated for the well 26 water treatment facility project, not to exceed the amount of $2,295,144,000. I said that wrong. Let me say that again. $2,295,144.
Second.
Fantastic. We have a motion on the table and a second for approval of the construction contract to Erminger Construction for well 26 water treatment facility project. Is there any discussion? Okay. If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and item 9 is approved. This brings us, thank you, Mr. Stewart. This brings us to the end of our agenda for the work session. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Vice President,
Councilman Cavanagh.
we adjourn the workshop.
Fantastic. There's a motion to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Good evening. I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's City Council meeting. For the record, it is Tuesday, February 13th at 6:00 PM. We will begin this meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Councilman Cavanagh.
Here.
Councilwoman Little Roberts. Councilman Taylor. Councilman Overton.
Here.
Councilwoman Strader.
Here. Great. Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, liberty and justice.
Thank you. Next is tonight's community invocation led by Rabbi Lifshitz. Mr. Clerk, is he present?
Madam Vice President, we confirmed with him, but I do not see him here present.
Okay. Is he online, perhaps?
It does not appear so.
Okay. That's all right. We'll move to our next item, which is the adoption of the agenda. There are no changes to the agenda tonight. Do I have a motion to adopt the agenda as published?
Madam Vice President,
Councilman Cavanagh.
again, seeing there aren't any requested changes, I move that we approve the agenda as published.
Second.
Excellent. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The agenda is adopted. Okay, next we have our public forum, future meeting topics. Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone signed up for the public forum?
Madam Vice President, we did not.
Are there any members of the public that would like to speak at the public forum? This does not include the land use items that are listed next. Okay, thank you. Now we will move on to our action items. First up, we have the first item, a public hearing for White Cliff Estates subdivision number 3, H 2023-0065. We will begin with staff comments.
Madam Vice President, I apologize. We're having some technical issues at that computer. I'm working through restarting it, so we should be about 1 to 2 minutes away.
Thank you. If you're just joining us, we apologize for the delay. We're having a slight technical issue. It'll just be a couple minutes. Thanks. Linda, are we ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Fantastic. We'll turn it over to you. Go ahead.
Good evening, Madam Vice President Strader and council members. We are here tonight for requests to vacate 3 feet of an 8-foot side yard easement located on the southern portion of the northern boundary of Lot 8, Block 4 of the White Cliff Estates Number 3 subdivision. located at 455 North Blissful Avenue. This site consists of 0.37 acres of land and it's zoned R4. The foundation for this lot was installed at the typical 5-foot side yard setback at the northern property line instead of the 8-foot wide setback shown on the plat. The width shown on the recorded plat was increased due to the location of a private pressurized irrigation line. No other utilities exist in the easement. The vacation of a portion of this easement does not reduce the required interior setback of 5 feet. Relinquishment letters were received from the utility company stating no objection to this proposed vacation. Based on that, staff would recommend approval of this vacation request. And at this time, I would stand for any questions that the council may have.
Thank you. Council, are there any questions for staff? Okay. Do we have the applicant present? Excellent. Welcome. Please state your name and address for the record.
Becky McKay, Engineering Solutions, business address 1029 North Rosario, Meridian. Glad it's this is my first time this year. Happy New Year. I'm representing the applicant on this particular lot. We are asking for a vacation of 3 feet of a pressurized irrigation easement. When they poured the foundation, framed the house, then all of a sudden it became apparent that there was an 8-foot pressure irrigation easement. So the 5-foot setback was met, but the easement was encroached upon. So it was at the point where, kind of the point of no return. And so my client, Todd Amix, called me and said, what do I do? I said, the only thing we can do is go before the council and ask to vacate a portion of that PI easement. And thanks to Mr. Bongiorno, the house did not burn down the other day. The painter had stained a door and then thrown the stained cloths in the corner and put a fan up, and they combusted. And when we saw the address of the fire, we were like, are you serious? Is that our vacation house? Yes, it was. It did not burn down, thanks to Meridian Fire Department. And so now they are obviously taking all the windows out and taking it down to the studs and rehabbing it. The house is already a custom home spoken for, so I feel very bad for the future homeowner, but obviously we're on the road to straightening this out. So this is one step, then my client's got to do step 2. So I ask that the council please support this. Thank you. Thanks for the Meridian Fire Department.
Thank you, Ms. McKay. Council, do we have any questions for the applicant? Thank you. This is a public hearing. Mr. Clerk, do we have any members of the public signed up?
Madam Vice President, we do not.
Okay. If there is a member of the public present that wishes to testify on this item, please come forward.
Madam Vice President,
Councilman Cavanagh.
seeing anyone clamoring to testify on this particular item, I move we close the public hearing on item 1, the vacation request for White Clef Estates number 3, H-2023-0065.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Fantastic. It's moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay. If all are in favor of closing the public hearing, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the public hearing is closed.
Madam Vice President,
Councilman Cavanagh.
it's been a minute since we've had Becky here. I almost want to give her a hard time, but
Oh,
it's a good evening. We got a lot to get to tonight. So I move that we approve item 1, vacation request for White Clef Estates subdivision, application number H-2023-0065 as presented.
for a second. Fantastic. Is there any discussion? Okay. If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Cavanagh,
Aye.
Little Roberts,
Aye.
Taylor, Overton,
Aye.
Strater.
Aye. The motion is carried and item number 1 is approved. With that, we will move on to our second action item for tonight, a public hearing for the Kleiner adjacent subdivision, H 2023-0059. We will begin this evening's public hearing with staff comments.
Thank you, Madam Vice President Strader. Council. Give me just a moment. The next item before you is a request for a combined preliminary and final plat. This site consists of 9.88 acres of land. It's zone CG, and it's located at 1730 North Records Way at the northeast corner of Records and Fairview Avenue. A little history on this property. A conditional use permit was previously approved for a 472-unit multifamily residential development on this site. And the director did approve an alternative compliance request for a reduced street buffer width of 16 feet along Records Way. And the application before you tonight is solely a plat application. It has nothing to do with the multifamily development, which has been previously approved. The comprehensive plan future land use map designation is mixed use regional. The applicant is requesting approval of a combined preliminary and final plat consisting of 2 building lots on 9.88 acres of land in the CG zoning district. Access to this development was approved from a right-in, right-out access driveway via Records Way along the west boundary of the site. 2 other accesses were approved via a shared driveway with the adjacent property to the east, Carmax, along the east boundary of the site. No access is proposed or approved via Fairview or Eldon Gray Street. A cross-access easement is required to be granted to the abutting property to the east, Carmax, for use of the portion of the shared driveway that lies on this site. Landscape street buffers are required along Fairview, Records, and Eldon Gray Street, landscaped in accord with UDC standards. A reduced buffer width was previously approved along Records, south of the entry, as I previously mentioned. The director approved a modification to the street buffer landscape requirements along Fairview with this application. I just want to side note, the staff report incorrectly stated that that was a request for a council decision tonight. And that actually is a director decision. So that will be corrected in the staff report with the findings, but just want to let you know that that request is not before you tonight. A 10-foot wide multi-use pathway is proposed within the street buffer along Fairview and Records in accord with the pathway's master plan for access to Kleiner City Park to the north. The commission recommended approval of this application to City Council. John Wardle, Brighton Corporation testified in favor at the commission hearing. No one testified in opposition. There were several people that commented, and those were Larry Vanover, Scott Dykstra, and Sean Thompson. Written testimony was received from Josh Beach, Brighton Corporation, the applicant, in agreement with the staff report conditions. Key issue discussion was concern pertaining to traffic congestion generated from the development. Key issues of discussion by the commission were the phasing of the project, the construction traffic impacts, and pedestrian access to the village shopping center to the west. Commission did not make any changes to the staff recommendation. And the only outstanding issue tonight for City Council pertains to what I previously mentioned about the alternative compliance request. Staff recommends conditions 1.1B and 1.2B are deleted, as the alternative compliance request is a director and not a council decision. The director has approved the alternative compliance request. There has been no written testimony since the commission hearing. The applicant is here tonight to present. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Sonia. Appreciate the clarification regarding the alternative compliance. Council, are there any questions for staff before we get started? Okay. Seeing no questions from council for staff, we'll now hear from the applicant, Mr. Wardle, for up to 15 minutes. Please state your name and address for the record.
Madam Vice President, good evening. For the record, my name is John Wardle with Brighton, 2929 West Navigator Drive, Suite 400, Meridian, Idaho 83642. Pleasure to be here this evening. Also, like Ms. McKay, it's my first council meeting this year, so Happy New Year to everybody. I intend not to take 15 minutes. I will just bring up really quickly here, see if you can see this. The project in front of you tonight is called Kleiner Adjacent Subdivision. It's a preliminary final plat, 2 lots. We have been through a conditional use permit already on this project, and it's been approved. Let me just give just a little quick history here of everything that's happened thus far. There was a CUP approval back in April 22. That is going to expire here in a couple months. We have submitted for a time extension. There have been 2 certificates of zoning compliance. The first one expired, and we submitted for another one. That one is now effective. And there were 3 building permits that were also submitted, but because of timing, those have expired. And let me explain why we've had some expirations here. It really comes down to financing. As you may know, financing has become a little bit more challenging, and this project is a 2-phase project. I'll back up to this, but as you can tell, there are 2 buildings in this project. There is the south building, which also includes amenities. That building is a structured parking and 4 stories of apartments up above, and then a clubhouse in between, which is shown down here on Lot 2, Block 1. And the clubhouse connects to the building on the north, which is a Lot 1, Block 1, which is also almost identical with structured parking and 4 stories of apartments above. Right now, the way that financing works on this project is we cannot finance all of the project at once, and the lender has requested that we only include what is in phase 1, which is the south building. And that's what's represented here in blue. So we're building all of the parking for the entire project. We're building the structured parking for building 1 and the clubhouse, building 1, all in phase 1. But building 2, which is shown in yellow here, is not being built at this time. It will come in the future. So at the request of the lender, we submitted a preliminary final plat, which is represented here. Lot 2, Block 1 is phase 1 of the project, and Lot 1, Block 1 is phase 2. And that shows how the line is separated between the 2 construction projects. A little complicated. A couple of years ago when we started this process, financing, at least rates, were not that complicated, and lenders were a little bit more agreeable, but this is what we do. And so per their request, we came to staff to come up with a solution, which is a 2-lot subdivision. There was one note in the staff report regarding alternative compliance. I don't need to get in that unless you are really interested, but there's a little red triangle here on the right-hand corner here, and that's the area that we're really talking about. There is a slight difference in what's allowed by code and what is required by ACHD. ACHD does not allow any grass between their storm drainage swell and the road. And in this particular area where we have the little red area, we exceed the 10 feet, which is city code. Our intent is, however, that when the curb line goes in, this is all landscaped. That borrow comes out. This is not really the way we want to treat it, but ACHD has bigger plans for Fairview and did not want that curb line to go into this time. So that's what the alternative compliance request really was about. So with that, and I stand for any questions, but we are in agreement with the staff report and with the Planning Commission's recommendation to council, and ask for your approval of the preliminary final plat, which is file number H-2023-0059. And if there are any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Wardle. Council, are there any questions for the applicant?
Madam Vice President.
Councilman Kavner.
Well, I see you, I think maybe 2 questions for you. That phase 2 that you're not going to go vertical on, approximately what, 3.5, 4 acres-ish?
Sure.
Okay.
The total site is just under 10 acres. I think the phase 1, or shown here in blue, that puts us, probably 5.5, close to 6 acres, with the balance being that second piece.
Okay. Then, Madam Vice President.
Go ahead.
Just want to make sure I heard you right. You planning to landscape the whole area at once, or you're going to landscape phase 2 when you decide to go vertical on it?
Madam Vice President, Councilmember Cavanagh, our intent is to landscape the entire buffer system. So Eldon Gray, Records, Fairview. We will landscape everything that is within phase 1. There might be some street trees or some parking lot trees in phase 2 that don't go in, but that would be part of the certificate of zoning compliance and also that building permit. But everything related to the subdivision will all go in at once with the project.
Madam Vice President.
Councilman Cavanagh, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Wardle. I think that was more my concern is around Eldon Gray, Fairview, et cetera, not having it kind of be a missing piece of the puzzle. So I appreciate that.
Absolutely. There is a gap in the sidewalk right there on Eldon Gray where you come out of the roundabout heading to the east. The sidewalk doesn't exist on our property, but we'll get that done at the very beginning as well. So that sidewalk system is complete.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice
Thank you. Other questions for the applicant? I have one. Do you have an update on timing for each phase?
We're currently, the timing factor for us is we need to have the plat recorded and a legal parcel. So as soon as that's done, our hope is that mid to late summer, we would be under construction of phase 1. Phase 2 really would be based on how the construction goes through phase 1, and we'll start leasing that up and we can move to phase 2. They won't be, there might be even closer than that, but I don't want to commit to before the first certificate of occupancy before we start on the second building.
Okay, thank you. This is a public hearing. Mr. Clerk, are there any members of the public signed up to testify tonight?
Madam Vice President, nobody signed up in advance.
Okay. Are there any more questions for the applicant? Looks like
Madam
none.
Vice President.
Councilman,
Cool. Take it.
Lieutenant Harper, please proceed.
I guess this one's, we've kind of gone through a few revisions of this along the way, and I just want to verify on Fairview, the turn lane / deceleration stacking lane. Is there any information that you can provide on that, just to clarify what we decided on? Because that was a requirement at one point that the police department recommended.
Mr. Wardle?
Hold on just one second here.
Sorry to throw you a curveball.
Well, good. It's a good question. So this is the current configuration of Fairview where it gives you the 3 lanes coming through. Sorry, I can zoom in on that if you want right now. There is, and we will be making the additional asphalt improvements for that drop right-hand turn lane coming in. So sorry, I wanted to show you what the actual is right now and then what that right-hand turn coming into Records would be. And then this one, it doesn't go to the center line, so you don't see that, but that's showing that drop lane coming in there.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay. Are there further questions from staff? Okay. Council? All right. Thank you, Mr. Wardle. Stay close by, please. Are there any members of the public present or online who would like to ask a question or testify? If you're online, please signify by raising your hand. Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone?
Madam Vice President, no, the only the only people online are city staff.
Okay. Anyone present that would like to testify, please step forward. Okay.
Madam Vice President.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Move we close the public hearing on item number 2, application H-2023-0059.
Second.
All right, it has been moved and seconded to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion? All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the public hearing is closed.
Madam Vice President,
Councilman Kavner.
I think this application is a good reminder of how much we appreciate our Planning and Zoning Commission. I know we appointed some new commissioners last week, but the questions that I maybe would have expected to answer here, where I think we're addressed the Planning and Zoning Commission, probably why there's no testimony tonight. So with that, Madam Vice President, I move that we approve item number 2, application H-2023-0059, with a couple of small changes. Based on staff recommendation, we're going to strike condition 1B and number 2B, as the alternative compliance request is a director and not a council decision. Other than that, leave it as presented by staff and include all testimony from the applicant this evening.
Councilman Kavner, is that 1.1B?
Madam Vice President, yes, I think that's what I said, but I very well could have bungled it. Would not be the first time. Won't be the last tonight either, folks.
Could be me. Is there a second?
Second.
Fantastic. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay, thank you. This seems fairly straightforward. Mr. Clerk, let's go ahead and call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Cavanagh.
Aye.
Little Roberts.
Aye.
Taylor.
Aye.
Overton. Strader.
Aye. All right, all ayes, and item number 2 is approved. Thank you. All right, moving on. Now we're on to item number 3, a public hearing for Linder Condos, H 2023-0074, located at 300 North Linder Road. We'll turn it over to staff comments.
Thank you, Madam Vice President Strader, Council. The next application before you is a request for a development agreement modification. This site consists of 0.98 of an acre of land. It's owned R1 in Ada County and is located at 300 North Linder Road. So history on this property, an annexation application with IL zoning was recently approved with the requirement of a development agreement, which was never executed. The community, I cannot talk tonight. Comprehensive plan, future land use map designation for this property is general industrial. The applicant proposes to modify the terms of the development agreement required with the previous annexation application with this application. Because the previous development plan was for a self-service storage facility, the future use of the property was restricted to that use through the development agreement. The applicant proposes to modify the agreement to include warehouse and flex space uses along with the previously approved storage facility use to allow more variety in uses that can develop on the site. All of the proposed uses are principal permitted uses in the IL zoning district and are subject to specific use standards in the UDC. The concept plan shown before you here has changed slightly. The one on the top is the one that was recently approved. The one on the bottom is the proposed plan. Previously, there were 8 tenant spaces in 2 buildings. Now there are 7 tenant spaces proposed, still in 2 buildings, totaling 15,643 square feet. The west building had to be reduced in size to accommodate the cross-access easement and driveway required to the adjacent properties to the north and the south. The access driveway via Linder Road was also shifted to the south to align with the driveway on the west side of the street. Off-street parking is proposed in accord with UDC standards. A minimum of 7 spaces are required, 13 are provided, which should accommodate any of the proposed uses. The building elevations have also changed slightly as shown. The ones on the left there are the existing elevations, the one on the right are the proposed. Final design is required to comply with the standards in the Architectural Standards Manual. There has been no written testimony submitted since the commission hearing. Staff is recommending approval, and the applicant is here to present tonight.
Okay, thank you, Sonia. Council, are there any questions for staff?
Madam Vice President,
Councilman Kavner.
a couple of quick questions, Sonia. So I want to start first at the DA not being executed. We don't see this very often. Can you give us, and maybe the applicant will give us some flavor as to why it wasn't executed? Do you have any history on kind of the rationale
Yeah,
behind
sure.
that?
Madam Vice President, Councilman Kavner, Council. The applicant has 6 months from the date of approval of the annexation findings to sign the development agreement and for it to be recorded. The applicant did not like the terms of the development agreement that were approved. They wanted to have more variety in uses. The way the development agreement was written, it was solely for self-service storage facility, which was what was approved with that previous application. So the applicant just wanted to modify that agreement before they signed it, which is allowed per our code.
So, Madam Vice President, a follow-up then, if I may.
Councilman Cavanagh, you are recognized for the remainder of your questions.
I appreciate that. So Sonia, again, I didn't have time to go back in the minutes from when this was initially annexed in, but my mind was telling me that council deliberated this and came to the conclusion that a limited amount of self-storage made sense because of the limited use. Am I remembering this, or am I confusing it with another application that was before us?
I'm not entirely sure. Council.
Okay, that's okay. I guess I can't ask you to look into all my crystal balls for me, so apologies for that.
Next time, let me know ahead of time and I can look into it for you.
Apologies, then I had intended to do my own homework today and the day got away from me. So one last maybe additional question then, Sonia, is here it talks about that it's gonna go on-street parking. Is that on-street parking on Linder? Or is that on-street parking gonna be
There's no on-street parking. There's off-street parking.
off-street parking?
proposed.
Okay, I must have misread that. Okay, then that satisfies my specific questions. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, we will now hear from the applicant for up to 15 minutes. Please remember to introduce yourself, state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Madam Vice President, Council, my name is Jeremy Putman. Address is 499 Main Street, Boise, Idaho 83702. The property owner and myself are coming here to ask for this amendment to the development agreement modification. And speaking to that a little bit, I'm also the second architect to work on this parcel. The initial architect, the property owner did not continue with. And as I took on the project, they wanted to make sure that there was a little bit broader use instead of so narrowly defining this parcel. All making sure that these uses are principally permitted in the zone. And it does seem to fit within the fabric of the area. It is in an industrial area across Linder. There's already industrial uses there. And going with the future use plan, it's also compliant there. So just wanting to give the property owner a little bit of flexibility. There will be a condo plat overlaid on this parcel in the future so that units can either be leased or sold to individual owners, and they can comply with the development agreement modification in some of those uses. It just, in current market conditions, it gives a little bit more flexibility for the property owner and persons wanting to conduct a business in the area. We are still proposing general compliance with the development agreement, the conditions of the development agreement modification, and we are going to provide a similar elevation, although touched up a little bit, working with the client to reflect a little bit, well, a different aesthetic from the previous design, but still in the same vein, with overhead doors and man doors accessible for the units on the north side, and then mezzanines interior for a little bit of extra storage space. And some of these units will have restrooms and potentially small offices for whatever business would like to move in there. And I think that's all I have. I did share a PowerPoint presentation with.
Sharing, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Are you touching the mouse?
I am.
Please. Okay. The mouse is going crazy.
While we're waiting, was it Mr. Putman?
Yes, ma'am.
Fantastic. You still have about 12 minutes. I think we'll pause your time so you have a moment to load up your presentation. Okay.
Yes. And this site plan, again, just shows it's same as in the staff report, general compliance, providing access as recommended by the city or the planning and zoning for access to the parcels to the north and south, and then alignment of the driveway with the existing driveway across Linder, just to help minimize access onto that street. Again, similar layout for what we've had, except for reducing the units, which still makes this a viable project. It can be done. And then just showing just updated color elevations, similar in texture and flavor to the previous design, but just updated slightly. And again, like Sonia mentioned, we are still going to be going through design review and CCC. I guess with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Putman. Council, are there any questions for the applicant at this time?
Madam Vice President.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Jeremy, thanks for these visuals. I know Sony shared, but I think are helpful. Your 13 parking spots, none of them are within kind of the bays of the garage, correct?
Correct.
And Jeremy, can you walk me through, if I'm remembering correctly, I mean, this is kind of similar to what it's kind of a use that is across the street on Linder. But am I remembering this piece of property correct, that you've got maybe residential use to either the north or the south?
Yes, there is a residential use to the north. Mhm.
So, Madam Vice President, I'll just kind of share kind of where I'm at on this, Jeremy, is that, you know, I struggled when this initially came in. I sometimes get criticized because I don't mind storage. I think it has a need in our community, and I saw this as a nice amenity for a need in kind of Old Town Meridian adjacent. But I'm also very sympathetic to people that have kind of lived on their land, even in the county, for a long time and have had Meridian kind of grow to their border. And so I'm sensitive to an enhanced use that was initially contemplated.
Mhm.
So I believe I was supportive of the storage unit, but I think what you're proposing here, I think we would both agree, is a more intense use
Certainly.
than occasional storage. And so it certainly, it's always a little irritating for, I'm sure for probably staff and the public and council. We go through a public hearing process and annexation request. Council deliberates, debates, and there's a development agreement. I know this was all before your time. And there was ample opportunity for the owner and the applicant to voice their concern about the development agreement. And I guess I don't recall that occurring. So to then have this process play out again, to come back for a development request, development agreement request, I don't think I'm going to be supportive of that tonight because one, I think that we had a process that played out, and while this allows for you to come back and request, we kind of already rendered a decision. At least for me, my support of the annexation was tied to the use. Because I want to be really mindful of the neighbors that are going to be impacted. And I think with you proposing what is a more intense use, it's not something that I'm going to be supportive of tonight. I appreciate you coming and bringing that. Good news, there's 5 of us. There won't be a tie tonight. But I wanted to kind of be upfront with you about really some concerns about something that I like. I just don't think that it is the right time or the right location for this particular piece.
Thank you, Councilman Cavanagh. Mr. Putman, would you like to respond?
Yes, Madam Vice President, Council, and Councilman Cavanagh. It is my understanding in talking with the current property owner of this parcel and a little bit of the history of the previous application, that the property owner to the north did submit a letter in support of the project and also reduce landscape buffer. So they are fully aware of the project and what is going on. And speaking with the property owner, I'm certain we could also reach out, or I know that they have reached out to the parcel owner to the north and just let them know. You know, there was also a mailer sent out for this, and no one showed, and it would have been very easy for the parcel owner to the north, you know, to walk over. So I do hear that, and I appreciate that sensitivity. That is very commendable. Just providing some more information for what I know to this to date.
Mr. Putman, it is a public hearing, so we very well may hear from members of the public that are impacted. I did have a quick question, and then I'll go to the other members of council as well. Could you give us a flavor for, I share that concern, so can you give us a flavor for the potential tenants that you're in discussions with? Maybe that is another way to tackle the issue.
Yes, certainly the parcel owner, in wanting to broaden the use of this, one, storage, like personal storage of purchasing a condo, is still on the table. But in discussions with those that he knows, even some of the businesses adjacent on Linder, the parcel owner is a contractor himself. And the types of uses that would be in here would most likely be storage of materials and things like that, small office. I have not heard of, a desire or conversation of much light manufacturing, but it's mainly been, storage of materials for use and use elsewhere offsite. So.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, you don't have a little more specifics, but I guess that's where you're at in the process. Councilman Taylor.
Madam Vice President. Yeah, Jeremy, thanks for the presentation. Kind of along those same lines, do you anticipate, or does the property owner anticipate the occupants being kind of a retail based, or is this primarily viewed as storage for an existing business where they could put materials or things? Or I'm just trying to get a sense of the traffic in and out and the types of ownership or uses of the property.
Not anticipating a lot of like retail frontage. I know that is allowed with the flex use, but the main conversations have been mostly in the warehouse type uses.
Okay, and follow-up question. In some of the discussion, I guess I'm thinking a little bit what Councilman Kavner mentioned in terms of not initially signing off on the initial agreement. Was it because conditions changed and therefore the desire for a different product changed their mind, or was the intention all along hopefully to have this type of a product? I'm just trying to get a sense for the ins and outs and how we ended up where we are today, because I'm a little bit sensitive too to what Councilman Kavner said with respect to here's what we want, but then didn't sign it, didn't agree to it, and then we are coming back with a little bit similar but yet modified plan. I just want to know what prompted the shift. Was it always hoping to have a different product, or did market conditions and suggest that a different product was a better type of use?
Mr. Putman.
Madam Vice President, Council, and Councilman Taylor, my understanding is that this has always been the intended design for this parcel. I'm not sure what happened with the previous applicant, but from what I understand, it does not appear that the parcel owner's intentions were fully communicated and expressed in that initial development agreement modification or application.
Are there any further questions at this time?
Madam Vice President,
Councilman Overton.
again, kind of on the same vein as you're hearing, the angle that I get most concerned about when I look at this is that under this new use, especially with the explanation that this could become a warehouse space for a company, is that 13 parking spots are going to be way too few depending on what use comes into that warehouse. And even if 4 of those spaces are used as storage, 3 of them, if they end up being a warehouse type space, could end up being completely taking up all your parking for work vehicles for whatever those businesses might be. And that's my gravest concern, is there is nothing more than those 13 spaces. And under the initial approval, the initial development agreement, that was really not a big concern because everybody was going to be temporary who was there. And now you may have more of a non-temporary use of parking spaces. And I fear an approval on this would be totally inadequate for parking for this location.
Mr. Putman.
Madam Vice President, Council, and Councilman Overton, I do appreciate that and understand the concern as far as the zoning regulations, we are actually providing more parking than is required for the amount of square footage. So the requirement for parking, I believe, is 9, and we're providing 13. So we want to make sure that there is adequate parking on this parcel for any mix of use that may come into each of these condoed units.
Thank you, Mr. Putman. Are there any further questions, or shall we hear from members of the public? Okay, thank you. Stick around, please. Mr. Clerk, is there anyone signed up in advance to testify?
Madam Vice President, nobody indicated they wanted to testify.
Okay. Are there any members of the public online at this time? Okay, thank you. All right, this is a public hearing. If you are a member of the public who would like to testify regarding this application, please approach the podium. Going once, going twice, sold. Okay. Thank you. Are there any further questions from council for staff or the applicant before we hear the final word?
Vice President, I have two questions. One, I think for
Councilman
Sonia,
Kavanagh.
one's for Mr. Neri. Sonia, Jeremy indicated that they had a letter in support from the neighbor with this use, but I don't see that. I don't know if that was been provided to us and I have somehow missed it, or if you can point me in the right direction so I can fish on my own.
Yes, Madam Vice President Strader, Councilman, yes, there was a letter approving or in agreement with a reduced buffer width. Typically I can't remember if it's 20 feet. Buffer width is required to residential. They agreed to a reduced buffer width of 5 feet. So I believe that is in the application file. Laserfish.
I was looking into public testimony file. That's why it did not come up. Madam Vice President, one more question for Mr. Neri. So,
Proceed.
Bill, where they haven't signed their development agreement, if this development agreement modification, it's odd that we're requesting something that hasn't been signed, but if this is unsuccessful, what does that mean for the annexation request?
So, Madam Vice President, members of the council, Councilman Cavanagh, so our standard protocol is until the development agreement is signed or agreed to, we don't annex the property. So the property would not be annexed then if that's the case. But Sonia was correct. That is a standard we created a number of years ago, allowing this one request prior to signature, because we had occasions where we put people through the entire process over again to do an amendment, and we thought that was somewhat unnecessary. If we haven't signed it yet, it's fairly recent in time. There's a change for a reason. So we do allow it. But yeah, to answer your question, the property won't be annexed until we get a development agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Okay. Are there any further comments or questions before we hear the final word from the applicant? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Putman, you're invited for up to 10 minutes to have the final word here.
Madam Vice President, Council, I do appreciate the feedback in this. Some of this is new, not having been a part of the previous application and those discussions. I guess one thing that and this is a normal narrative for areas of a city that is developing and realizing a fuller density and a greater use for its citizens. So this is normal, and I understand that the hesitation and do have appreciation. I think we have, shown that this parcel owner has talked with surrounding property owners just to be neighborly and let them know what is happening. There is also similar development south on Linder that is kind of a similar type of idea where there are tenant spaces with warehouses, adjacent residences, and I think a current application for like a gym type use. So this is, while yes, it is, the next kind of domino to fall in this area, as it were, it is not unusual for this area. And we just would appreciate your consideration and approval of expanding the use for this particular parcel.
Thank you. Is that all, Mr. Putman?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Quick question for the city attorney. If this application is denied this evening, is there a time frame that the applicant would have to wait to make an additional request, as with some of our other applications? Or what would that process look like if, for example, they were to firm up a more clear tenant and could put some more guardrails or scope around who the type of user?
So, Madam Vice President, members of the council, and Sonia could correct me if I'm, if a development agreement isn't signed, there is a 6-month window in code. But it does then require some initiation on the city's part to also notify the applicant that, again, this project is not moving forward. No, the application can't move forward any longer with that development agreement. They're gonna have to come back. But they'd have to start the process over. So I mean, they'd have to begin over again with a project, go through the process of what is it they want to do, because it hasn't been annexed and they haven't complied with the code. But normally at this juncture, we kind of wait and see what the applicant's going to do. I don't know, hard and fast planning will contact folks. I know they reach out to us a lot of times, and Mr. Parsons keeps track of those timetables, but I don't know how quickly they'll go back. But that would be where we would go, is what's their next plan? Again, the 6 months will expire. They are supposed to bring forward something. If they don't, they may need to start over. I don't know specifically the process, and Sonia would be more attuned at what the planning side of that would be.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Sonia, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Madam Vice President Strader, Council, the only thing I'm kind of concerned about, or don't have an answer to, Mr. Neri, is they've run out of time on their 6-month window to sign the existing development agreement. What do they do tonight if this is not approved? Is it an immediate start over because they're out of time, or is there any additional time granted to sign the existing DA?
So, Madam Vice
Neri.
President, members of the council, maybe to answer that question, again, there is a kind of a limbo. I mean, it does say shall in the code, so I'm not gonna step away from that. But we have given people some grace if they're going to move forward. I mean, if this were not to be approved, they wanted to sign the existing DA to at least move the project forward, they still can come back and do a modification of the development agreement. I mean, they could still come back and do another application, begin the process to modify this a second time, maybe with, as Madam Vice President has said, more concrete plans, more concrete clarity on what they want to do. So they kind of have two choices. Either they're going to start over because they haven't signed this development agreement. Again, like I said, we haven't been super tight on the 180 if they're going to move it forward and get this and keep it moving. If they're not, but that's their only option, is they could, essentially move forward with it as is or start over.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Maybe one more question, and I can see the applicant discussing, so we'll give them a moment to do that. Would it be appropriate or make sense for the council to extend the period that the original DA is valid for to give the applicant the ability to sign it?
So, Madam Vice President, members of the council, Sonia, the time period, and correct me, my memory is failing me tonight, but we have given people some time, we have given them an extension of time to sign the development agreement, or is it just to begin the project? I can't recall the specific.
Yes, Mr. Neri, we have, and that process is through a development agreement modification, which is what's before you tonight. However, Mr. Neri, would that have to be noticed for that reason? And if that is the case, possibly recommend continuance to a couple weeks and renotice it and make a decision then.
That would be probably the easiest way to make sure the public has an opportunity to weigh in, would be to extend it, as Sonia said, to continue this process a couple weeks so we can get some notice again.
Thank you, Mr. Neri. Mr. Putman, would you please approach for a moment? So you've heard some discussion, and I know you were also kind of in a sidebar, but just to summarize, the options, I think you could give us some direction if you'd like us to go ahead and vote tonight, or would you like to request a continuance to perhaps get some more concrete plans and a request together or the council?
So I guess, sorry, Madam Vice President and Council, because of the sidebar, can you clarify the options that we've got moving forward?
Mr. Putman, and I'm happy to. I'll probably lean on the city attorney just a hair, but it sounded to me like if this application is denied, which we don't know, we haven't voted yet, the process would start over because the original development agreement is going to expire. And so if the process were to start over, you'd have to go through the whole process again. If you were to request a continuance, perhaps you could come back in 30 days or something if you have some more concrete plans you think would come together. I can't tell you what road you should go down. That's just an option. Mr. Neri, did I get that correct? Did you want to add anything?
Madam Vice President, no, you had it correct. I mean, really, you have those two options. Either continue to clarify some of the things the council's asked for, or if it were to be denied, start over.
Okay. Madam Vice President, Council, and City Attorney, appreciate that clarification. I think probably the preference would be to have a continuance if the application is denied tonight. Yeah.
How long would you like to continue it for?
30 days would be adequate, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That was very helpful. Okay, council, we've heard from members of the public. Well, we haven't heard from members of the public, unfortunately, but we've talked amongst ourselves. We've heard from the applicant the request for continuance. I'm looking around. Do we have any motions, discussion?
Madam Vice President,
Councilman Cavanagh.
I'd be happy to make a motion here in a moment, but I want to also be fair to the applicant. If we're going to request it for 30 days per their request, I think it is important that we are pretty clear about the things that we are wanting to see come back. So what I heard was, I want to make sure that I'm capturing this, is I think Councilmember Strader, you're looking for a little bit more concrete as to specific tenant use. Who are the tenants? What is the contemplated use? Councilmember Overton, I heard your valid concerns about parking. I'm not quite sure how they're going to address that particular piece, but I think you would like to maybe hear some plans around how to mitigate parking concerns. Certainly, I've got some concerns about use and the impact on the neighboring residential. I'm asking my other good colleagues if there's any other, want to give them the opportunity to be clear about what we're asking them to bring back, and want to make sure that we're giving them good direction as well.
Councilman Cavanagh. Just speaking for myself, I think it would benefit you to take a continuance if you feel there will be clarifying information that the use is not a more intensive use, that it's similar to what was contemplated, perhaps that it's a warehouse and flex space where the parking is appropriate and you can narrow that type of user in. I'm not sure it will benefit you to get a continuance if you can't, provide that type of an update. So that I kind of leave the ball in your court, but that's what I would be looking for. I would be looking for that type of information, that there are some mitigating factors that would get me comfortable with intensifying the use. You would probably have to have some pretty specific guardrails around the type of user.
Yeah.
Council, are there any further comments?
Madam Vice President.
Councilman
question.
Taylor.
Are we going to be allowing a continuance for 30 days? Are we voting on that? Or are we allowing, so we'll be voting to allow a 30-day continuance with the information? Okay.
Councilman Taylor, if a motion is made to do so, then yes, I think that's the direction it's going to go.
Madam Vice President, just for a quick comment, I think it'd be helpful for me to just share some thoughts with the applicant on this. I think there's all valid concerns. I think the one sticking point for me is changing the use originally that you had mentioned at the forefront. I do think it's a fair comment, though, to say, I know we want to know that kind of applicants that'll be there, but I think it's kind of hard to say exactly what that might be. I also think it's, when thinking of owning and developing a property that, especially as you're looking to maximize the value of the property, I'm concerned if we were to put guardrails around the kind of tenants that would be there. I'm sympathetic to the parking. What if somebody had to put a little CrossFit gym in there and you had, 15 or 20 people showed up in the morning because they wanted to work out in this little, one-man CrossFit gym, I think we could see some real issues with that. But when I look at the surrounding area and the types of properties that are there, I actually think this is a really good fit. I think there's a lot of self-storage kind of close. There's more always coming online. I actually really like the concept. I think I like the idea of it being kind of an overlay of a condo space to allow, again, I think property owners should have the ability to maximize the value of the property in the highest and best use. So my inclination is if it's aligned with some of the requirements we've placed upon them and they're in compliance with that, and if our only concern is a possible constraint of parking or maybe how the process got to where we got, I'd be supportive of this application. I think what we've asked them to do is generally acceptable to me, though I am a little bit concerned about not agreeing with the original development agreement with the intention of always maybe moving this direction. But I do think it's hard to put some guardrails around a piece of property. And I would like to see people be kind of creative in how they want to use the property. And I think this is a good approach to that. But I would also maybe suggest if there's a way to provide some input from the public or any additional information that would give us more clarity, I think that would only be helpful to the applicant. So I thought I just wanted to share that in this forum tonight.
Thank you, Councilman Taylor, and certainly you are also welcome. Everyone is welcome to make a motion. So I think we're at that point in the evening. Discussion, motions.
Madam Vice President,
Councilman Overton.
just to give them a fair standing of where I'm at. After everything's been presented tonight, I can't help but agree with our original decision on what this original DA was for the stated reasons that we've given across this panel tonight. I've seen situations in this city already where I look at them very similar to what we're dealing with here. And I want to look at them and go, how on earth did that happen? How did a warehouse space turn out to be the home of a heating and cooling company that put all their product into the warehouse, took a small office area and made it their dispatch center? And now I got 8 trucks parking in front of everybody's area because there is not enough parking for that business. And there's a lot of other shared uses. And I will not, and I won't vote in favor of that, knowing I could be setting everyone else who uses this up into that kind of a failure. I think what we approved originally was the right idea for this location based on its size. And it's going to be hard for you to sway me that we should change to this new idea that you brought forward tonight.
Thank you.
All right. Madam Vice President.
Councilman Cavanagh.
The motion's always in order, so I'm going to move that we continue H 2023-0074 to March 19th, 2024, to leave the public hearing open, and I'm getting maybe a nod from the attorney to have the applicant renotice for the public hearing. Is that typical in these situations?
You can direct it, that's fine.
Councilman Cavanagh, would it be okay for a little discussion if we could hear from the city clerk regarding the calendar?
Madam Vice President, Councilman Cavanagh, March 19th is a night that we've canceled due to quorum issues. So we're looking at March 12th, which we can notice for. It's 28 days, or we can go to March 26th.
Madam Vice President, as always, the clerk is anticipating my needs. He gave me a note that said March 12th worked. I wanted to give the benefit to the applicant, give them an additional week. Clearly, always follow the clerk's directions. So I will amend my motion to reflect March the 12th, 2024.
Is there a second? Second. Great. It has been moved and seconded to continue this hearing to March 12th. Is there any further discussion?
Madam Vice President.
Yes.
Just a couple of quick comments to the applicant. I appreciate you being here tonight. Recognize it's always hard to follow somebody else, but this is also, I think, our council trying to be flexible, right? This really should come back through the re-annexation process. We're trying to be business friendly, give you guys the opportunity to address some concerns. But I think our vice president gave good direction and advice. If we can't get there on this, that's okay. Withdraw and come up with a better mousetrap and know that you've got a body here that's going to be receptive to what you guys want to do. And we look forward to seeing you when that time comes.
Is there further discussion? All right. If not, there is a motion. Clerk, please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Vice President Cavanagh.
Aye.
Little Roberts.
Aye.
Taylor. Overton.
Aye.
Strater.
Aye. Item number 3 is continued. Thank you. Hopefully we'll hear from you again and it'll be a positive discussion. Okay. With that, we'll move on to our final land use item. Item number 4, the public hearing continued from January 9th for the mixed-use comprehensive plan text amendment. I expect this will be a meaty discussion. And with that, when you're ready, Mr. McClure, we'll turn it over to you, Brian, for staff comments.
Madam Vice President, I'm here to present a follow-up to the one on January 9th regarding the mixed-use amendment to the city's comprehensive plan.
Excellent. Please proceed.
Over the next few slides, I'll review some of the concerns that staff heard previously. One of the previous concerns that staff heard from council during the public hearing was the level of public involvement. In response, the rescheduled public hearing included another approximately 50,000 next door hits, 20,000 newsletter hits with approximately 7,500 opens, and several individual and small group citizen meetings. I don't want to mislead that. That's pretty normal, but just to state. The other concern of note that staff took away from the meeting was concern of footprint height and guidelines. In response, staff provided a memo with some additional background context and options. This slide includes some additional context and history on the topic of building sizes. Council has the ability to require discretionary building restrictions of any type with annexations, rezones, and CUPs in mixed-use areas. Council also has the ability to waive some guidelines with good reason, and also has approved changes to the future land use designations and the future land use map, in part to avoid size restrictions for buildings. Examples here, good reasons, are Costco and Waltman. Additional requirements may provide some comfort, but may still be sidestepped with no guaranteed for application of the guidelines. Design is also complicated. Staff have continued concerns in maintaining delineation between general guidelines and strict requirements when it comes to building design features on the site. There are many ways to mitigate for building mass through context-sensitive building and site design. And staff have no way to justify the adopted values for the maximum building areas as proposed in the updated mixed-use text. They appear arbitrary, and if they ever had justification, that's been lost. Lastly, we have some other adopted policies that very much support the new text. Here we have several of those policies that staff could do a better job referencing within mixed-use developments. These are not prescriptive and they are very open, but the clearer the city is with approval expectations, the more staff can successfully advocate for these. And I'll let you read those.
Thank you, Brian. I think we have all read the memo. So I think so. So you can just carry on.
So I'll wrap up here with some additional comments received during the hearing continuation. The summary here is something of a disservice given the length of the comments received, and so I'm leaving them as concluding remarks. We had one additional form survey provided that included no comments but general support from answers that are yes or no. Several engaged stakeholders provided some very thoughtful written comments regarding this application. The general feeling, and again, this is a summary, is that the community values the guidelines related to maximum square footage. There is a sense of already limited tools being eroded, and that flawed or otherwise existing building restrictions are important. Some of the comments also included a number of related and unrelated comments regarding public process, and so I hope you've had a chance to look at those. With that, this is the same request we had last time, and I'm open for conversation and questions.
Thank you, Brian. Councilman Cavanagh.
Thank you,
Mhm.
Council Vice President Strader. Brian, a question for you. The comment about concerns from the public. This is the first that I'm hearing about it, and again, not your fault. I think the link to that typically links to the public records file for this just links to the website that you guys have put together. So I appreciate you flagging it for us that they are in the public record. We as council did not have the chance to review that. We weren't provided it, nor I think the public. Again, not a glaring error, not a mistake on anyone's part, but just maybe if you wouldn't mind summarizing some of that, or at least forwarding the link to us so that we have at least, and I may be alone in that I wasn't able to review it.
Councilman Cavanagh. I requested the link and was able to review the public comment, and it was extensive and I thought very rich feedback worthy of consideration. I'll let you respond, Brian.
Madam Vice President, Councilman Cavanagh, it's very difficult to summarize. And putting aside some of the other topics that aren't directly related to this application, you had three very engaged stakeholders provide written testimony for that. Their names that are not unfamiliar to you. They shared council's concerns after they weren't previous concerns that they were aware of. After the last hearing where you asked us to go out and talk to them, they shared some of the concerns that several persons on council, concerns they had. They were generally that while the mixed use requirements in mixed use neighborhood and mixed use community for the building restrictions that aren't either a school or vertically integrated project are important. It helps to protect community, to transition and protect existing neighborhoods, and that they wanted those. One of them understood, at least one of them understood that it was a little arbitrary, but leaned towards sort of my comments about other standards being eroded and not having a lot of other things to fall back on. And the other two were a little bit more general, I think, but had the same concern that they would like those existing requirements for maximum building square footage to remain in the proposed changes to mixed use.
Brian, would you mind if I jump in a little? Thank you. To give you my take on it after reading it, and I think you're going to want to read these comments for yourself. Like if I were you, I would want to. I thought there was a lot of really good feedback. I thought that it was extremely thoughtful. There were several that were multiple pages. There was actually there was a review of this memo and all of the options. There was some feedback regarding option 3, this idea of a 30-foot additional setback for every 1 story of height disparity, that seemed very inappropriate, and that was not a good solution. I think there was an acknowledgement that this proposal is an improvement overall to the process, but that taking away the building area restriction kind of takes away the only concrete bright line that individuals have to try to enforce this idea of neighborhood transition. And there was actually a suggestion, and I don't know if that would belong better, you know, in the development of like design standards, but there was a very specific suggestion that perhaps in like mixed-use neighborhood developments or other mixed-use developments, that there not be more than a one-story difference between directly adjacent uses. And I thought that that was kind of an interesting idea. And I don't think I'm doing it proper justice because we did hear from 3 folks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm. Other questions, comments, reflections? All right, with that,
Madam Vice President.
Councilman Kavner.
Brian, just, I want to make sure that I also heard you correctly. So things happening in real time. If I heard you correctly, you and staff had the opportunity to review those comments and didn't make any changes to what was presented to us a month ago. Is that correct?
Madam Vice President, Councilman Cavanagh, some of their comments are hard to disagree with, but because of the boxes we operate in, yes, that's the case.
Madam Vice President.
Councilman Kavner.
Brian, as always, I appreciate your willingness to be candid and diplomatic. I'm bad at both of those, and I appreciate you walking us through some of this tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Brian, is there anything you want to add before we open up the public hearing portion of this evening?
Madam Vice President, I don't think I have anything right now.
Thank you. All right, this is a public hearing. Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone signed up to testify here?
Madam Vice President, we did not.
Okay.
The only people online are city staff.
Mm-hmm. And I know we did hear from some members of the public that that did write in that they would not be able to attend this evening. We do have a couple members in the audience. This is a public hearing. If you'd like to provide any testimony or thoughts, you're welcome to approach the podium at this time. Okay, thank you. Thanks for being with us. All right. So council, just to summarize, and I can give, I know I've been very loud about this particular topic. You know, if you feel like you'd like to move forward tonight, we could consider doing that. I personally feel that it would be important for all the members of council to be able to review the public testimony that was provided. I thought it was very detailed and helpful. And we did have members of the public take a significant amount of time to provide that feedback. So I would recommend a continuance, but perhaps with some direction or at least some reflection on the memo itself. But I'll open it up for discussion.
Madam Vice President. I appreciate the work that has went into this on staff, and I don't feel good about this because I clearly missed, and again, I still haven't found where that public feedback is, and so I may look to my good colleagues to show me where you found it and where I missed it, because that to me is an important piece to at least be able to have been prepared and maybe provide some context to staff. So while I do not want to slow this process down for everyone as a result of me, I won't be voting in favor of adoption this evening.
Madam Vice President,
Yes.
if the concerns are strictly regarding the square footage change, and that's all I've heard, a solution, and as I wrote in the original staff report, the only reason we brought this forward is because it was pointed out to us. A solution would be to keep the existing text as they are and not strike them. And we could come back and modify it later.
Thank you, Brian. That is something for us to chew on. One thing the only thing that bothers me about that approach, I don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, because I think on the whole, the work you've done here is fantastic. The modeling, I mean, you and I and Councilman Overton went through your your projection modeling of the impacts, and there's been so much legwork that's gone into this. I agree with you totally that the direction it's going is very positive. A fear that I have is that we keep this building area footprint restriction, but don't seize this opportunity now to craft something maybe that would create a building height restriction that's relative to adjacent uses, or even just give you some direction about the next step is we really need to look at design standards or something. I just don't want to not seize that moment and have that follow-up happen. So that's my only concern there. And I did think, that the members of the public really did provide good testimony. I guess a question, I don't know if it's a question for Bill or for you, but if we were to continue this, for example, for a week, could we have that short of a continuance in order to address this one issue? So perhaps we could, continue the public hearing, but with maybe, a shorter turnaround. Do we have a noticing issue? Like, how does that all work?
Madam Vice President.
Mr.
So
Henry.
no additional noticing is required, so you can continue this just simply for a week for more information. That's
Okay. All right. Mr. Clerk, I'm looking over at you. I believe you have a pretty light agenda so far for next week. Is that right?
Madam Vice President, I'm double checking. I do believe so,
Okay.
but I can confirm.
So Madam Vice President, while the clerk's looking that up, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I just, a week I think is great. Obviously, you all can do what you'd like to do. I just want to put that in context a little bit. The print deadline for next week is noon tomorrow, so you probably won't have anything really to stew on. So new information will be really new to you because anything we propose will be after the print deadline to the clerk likely. So the discussion can be continued, but you really won't have anything more substantive to really chew on. I don't say that to encourage you to continue it further. But I just wanted to, if your expectation is that you actually have something black and white to review before next week, your packet goes out before then.
Mr. Hood, if you don't mind, just to tease that out a little bit though, we already have testimony from the public that hasn't been reviewed by council, and Councilman Cavanagh, you're not unique. I had to actually specifically request a link, and I thought maybe I was just like the odd woman out and hadn't figured this all out, but I think all of us are in the same boat that we haven't been able to review that. So it seems like if we put this on the agenda for next week, we'll all at least be able to review the public testimony that's been received. Hypothetically, we could keep this public hearing open. In the event that there's additional testimony, we could receive that just like any other application, right?
So my apologies. Yes, I kind of understood it as twofold. One, so that anyone that didn't review what I'm assuming is in the record online and available today, some more time to review that. I also heard the last part was to maybe play with some of the existing language if we're going to keep this to make it perfect or improve on the good to be even better. So if that's not part of it, and we can even play with that a little bit, just you won't, again, have anything from staff to further consider prior to next week.
Mr. Hood, that's perfect. We're on the same page. I'm not looking for staff to provide any additional analysis in writing. I would personally encourage you to at least reflect on the suggestion that was made regarding some type of a height restriction for mixed use community, whether it would make sense to have some type of a height restriction of 1 story between directly adjacent uses. If you feel that that is a solution that could be considered, and maybe your comments will be, hey, we think that's part of the design standards process and that's where that should take place. I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, but that's the one piece I think I'd like to hear a little more from you on, Brian. But I'm just looking to everybody else. Is there any concern, anything further from planning staff specifically that we're looking for? Yes,
Vice
Councilman
President.
Taylor.
Yeah, I got pretty comfortable with kind of where we were with that, but I thought I was just the new guy and didn't understand how to access this stuff. So I'm glad that the veterans on council also failed. I would like to review it and compare that with what's been proposed. I'm not looking for anything new either from staff. I'm pretty close to being comfortable, but I think a week to review those comments, especially it sounds like there's something of note in them. I would appreciate that.
Great, okay.
Madam
Sounds
Vice
good.
President.
Yes, Councilman Overton.
First off, I'd like to commend planning again for all the work they've done on this. I know it's a once-a-year process to make this change, and a tremendous amount of work and thought went into it. I guess one of the questions I have is I did not have a chance to review the public remarks. But just to get this out there in front of all of us, with the public remarks being out there, Ryan, you brought the same product forward. If there's changes to be made, are you looking for council to make those suggested changes? Or are we looking for you to make those changes and bring them back to us? Because I think that's kind of important that we understand that before we meet again.
Thank you, Councilman Overton. Brian, I'll maybe just chime in with one thing and then turn it over to you. It sounded like from reading the memo and from reading the other information you've provided that because it's been through the planning and zoning process, you did not feel comfortable independently making additional recommendations outside of the memo without direction from council, but I don't want to put the words in your mouth.
Madam Vice President, Councilman Overton, and Madam Vice President, that point is true. Logistically, it's also just, I don't want to presuppose conversation next week. It's going to be very difficult, just being honest, to craft anything that's going to work in most conditions. It sounds easy to just say one story next to adjacent parcels, but you can have very deep parcels. You can have property owners who don't care. You can have very creative design solutions for that. I mean, they may have wide buffers. A partial, you look at, some parcels are huge. You know, what's the minimum length there where you sort of say, okay, that's no longer really development because we're talking about a parcel that hasn't been annexed yet. It's 80 acres and you said one story. Like there's just the sideboards there, and the nuance and what you have to consider is pretty vast. And I'd be hard pressed to find anything more general that I support that isn't more code-based, more design-based, and include other things like landscaping, parking, actual architectural treatments, terracing. I mean, there's just other things you can do, and I wouldn't feel good about recommending some blanket standard here. That doesn't mean it's not bad. My standards just might be off, but it'll be difficult for me to get there. I'm happy to have the conversation, though.
Thank you, Brian. You know, yeah, that's a question I had was, you know, we have several parts, you know, of our comprehensive plan where we say, you know, pretty general things like transition between neighborhoods is very important. I wondered if guidance that was not super specific, but said generally in mixed use neighborhood, we would expect to see height disparity of no more than one story between directly adjacent uses. If something like that would be helpful. And again, I don't want to craft it for you, but it seemed like a worthy recommendation from the public, at least for us to consider. I think what I would be looking for from you would be, and it's totally fine if the answer is, I think that's what you just said, hey, that sounds interesting. That's part of a UDC design standard overhaul. That's where that needs to take place. And we could always give you next week, if we thought it was helpful, we could always give you that direction. Like city council would love to see us work on that next. I don't know, I hope I'm not mishearing you.
No, I think those are valid comments. I understand. Thank you.
All right, well, I don't know if I'm out on a little island by myself with that suggestion at all. So it sounds like we've all got at least the majority of council's got a desire, it sounds like, to read the public testimony, come back. So with that, council, do I have a motion to keep the public hearing open and continue, please?
Madam Vice President.
Councilman Kavner.
I move that we continue item number 4, the public hearing for H 2023-0057. Move that we continue this item to next Tuesday, February 20th, 2024. And then request that staff send a link that includes all the public testimony that isn't attached to this agenda this evening to the mayor and council, and to make that public testimony available via the application material link so that the public that wants to review this agenda for next week has the opportunity to see it as well.
Second.
All right, excellent. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay,
Madam Vice Chair, can I ask a clarifying question? So what I can do is place the secondary link on the agenda. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay.
Mr.
Create a
Clerk, that
short-
is fantastic.
create
Yeah,
a
because
separate
there,
shortcut.
there is a link to the public facing website, which is very helpful. I don't think we want to remove that. We're just adding an additional link with the materials for the application. That is fantastic. Mr. Clerk, any issues on February 20th? Should be fine, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. With that, we've got a motion. It's seconded. Let's call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Cavanagh,
Aye.
Little Roberts,
Aye.
Taylor, Overton,
Aye.
Strader.
Aye. Okay, with that, the public hearing for the mixed-use comprehensive plan text amendment has been continued 1 week. We look forward to discussing that further. That brings us to future meeting topics. Well, the cat is away. Just kidding. Okay, fellow council members, any suggestions of future meeting topics? Mr. Cavanagh?
Madam Vice President, no future meeting topics right now, but just a point of personal privilege. It is challenging to be thrust upon one to conduct a meeting. And I just want to commend you. You did an exceptional job tonight of playing traffic cop and hearing the public, working with staff. So job well done this evening.
Oh, thank you so much. We're not there yet, so let's not jinx it. Thank you. You all have been very helpful as well in making motions and being very clear. I appreciate everyone's support. Any other comments, future meeting topics? Okay. All right, with that, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, excellent. We have a motion to adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Excellent. We are adjourned.